If you haven't paid attention to what's going on with the current console generation, then you might not realize that we are nearing the end of this current console generation, and the next generation is on the brink. A lot of people are estimating like 2028. You have PlayStation that's working on the PlayStation 6, and then you also have Xbox that is working on Project Helix. And normally this would make sense, every console generation lasts about 7 to 10 years on average. And, we are approaching that mark, and a 2028 release window definitely, follows that logic. However, this current console generation is so unique compared to others in the past. I don't think that a new console generation is going to pan out well for PlayStation or Xbox. I want to break it down. First, we must talk about this current console generation and the issues that it has. So, obviously, the PS5 and the Xbox One Series X came out around 2020 ish. And obviously, 2020 was a very hard year for a lot of businesses and just the economy as a whole, especially tech. PS5s and Xbox One Series X had a hard time getting into consumers' hands because of supply chain issues and scalpers and all this other stuff, which then caused developers to continue making games for the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, the last gen consoles, because a lot of people couldn't get their hands on the new generation, which was the PS5, Xbox One Series X, you understand. This led to a lot of cross-generational releases, basically games that were coming out on like the PS4 and the PS5, and examples like God of War Ragnarok or Spider-Man Miles Morales. I can't really think about the Xbox ones too much. You get the point though. A lot of developers were stuck in this cross-generational phase longer than they would like to be. And it's not unusual for, transitions between generations to have cross-generational releases. Like this happened with Xbox 360 and stuff. It's not unusual, but this period of cross-generational releases was so extended. It really did last a few years. There was only a handful of games that were exclusive to the next generation at the time. For example, like Demon Souls is the only one I can think of for the PS5 that was like a PS5 exclusive. There wasn't really an incentive for people to buy a PS5 because you would be playing all of the games that you're currently playing on PS4 just potentially with a new coat of paint on it for $500. I would say this cross-generational period lasted about 4 years when finally in 2024 developers were able to stray away from the PS4 and the Xbox One and actually start utilizing the PS5 and the Xbox One Series X to their fullest capabilities, because these developers had been developing games for the PS4 and the PS5 and vice versa for Xbox. Because they were, developing games for both generations, they weren't making games to their maximum potential that was catered to the next generation console, which is very unusual. For example, during the Xbox 360, we had tons of games that utilized the technology on that console so well, and you couldn't get an experience like that on any other console. Games that came out on the PS5, like, they were released cross-generationally and they were pretty much bottlenecked because they had to cater to the last generation. As a gamer that experienced this during this time period, it really just felt like there was no game that was pushing boundaries, and it really didn't feel like it was worth it to buy a next gen console. And a lot of people felt like that for years and years and years, which severely hurt the PS5 and the Xbox One Series X. It really hurt these consoles really bad. Fast forward to now in 2026, I do feel like we have recovered from that time period, and we are just now getting off on the right foot and getting a ton of games released that are exclusive or should be exclusive to the next gen. And, it feels great to have all these games. Like, I can't even list them. Like, the last 2 years, we've been getting a lot of great titles that are amazing on next gen. But now, like, with that just feeling like it's getting its footing and it's building momentum, PlayStation and Xbox are announcing next generation consoles. Well, why is a next generation console a bad idea? Well, for starters, it's what I just talked about. Developers are lagged behind the current console generation. Like I said, developers are just now getting caught up to the new technology, to the technology that came out in 2020. To sell a console, you have to have games. The PS5 and the Xbox One Series X should be the lesson learned there. There was no games for the longest time. And if developers are lagged behind, nobody's necessarily going to be prepared to make a new game for the next gen. Some developers are gearing up to make a game for the next gen, for example, like Santa Monica Studios. But with the current economic conditions of technology, which we're going to talk about in a second, they understand that people aren't going to necessarily be flocking to a new generation console to play their game. They're probably going to be releasing cross-generational titles once again, and we could have a repeat of what happened in 2020. This period with a next generation could last years because the economics of new technology right now is not working for customers and consumers, which is your target demographic for a video game console. Getting into the logistics of why this doesn't work, we need to talk about the RAM apocalypse. The RAM apocalypse is hurting these consoles so bad. The PS5 and the Xbox One Series X in particular. Pretty much every piece of gaming tech across the board is struggling. The Steam machine, even Nintendo, Steam Deck, whatever. Everything's going up in price. But specifically for the PS5 and the Xbox One Series X, they are taking the hardest hit because these consoles are 5 to 6 years old and they went up in price versus when they originally released 5 or 6 years ago. That has never happened ever in the gaming industry. That has never happened, which is huge alarm bells should be ringing off for Sony and Microsoft. Because for consumers, if this current console generation is starting to become unaffordable, what makes you think an upgrade in technology is going to be more affordable? We're going to talk about the limitations of the technology in a sec, but just fiscally, economically speaking, this does not make any sense whatsoever if things continue down the path that they are heading on, which it really does look like it's going to be like this for the next few years. The RAM apocalypse is just another wrench thrown into the disaster, though, with these consoles, because if you guys remember when the Xbox One Series X and the PS5 first launched, there was the GPU crisis with cryptocurrency mining and stuff, and that was a fad, and a lot of people are saying that the AI sort of thing, like the AI spending is a fad. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but this definitely is going to have a lot more length and mileage than the cryptocurrency mining situation. But, that also did impact this current console generation. They had a massive GPU shortage, which is another major component in this technology, and it really hurt them at the start as well. Anyways, though, with the current economic conditions that we're in, a new generation console would be probably 4 figures. If you want a technological upgrade that makes it worth it to jump to a next generation console, it's probably going to be $1,000+, which just makes no sense. It really doesn't make any sense because at that point, people are just going to build computers and you're going to see more of your audience flock to PC, which has already been an issue for both of these companies as well as gamers going to PC. Anyways, you guys are all probably familiar with how expensive new technology is right now and why a new generation console doesn't make financial sense for you and me, right? I now want to talk about the actual technological upgrades that could potentially happen with a new generation console. I think we're capped out at consoles. I really do. I think we're capped out at technology. The PS5 and the Xbox One Series X can run games at 120 frames. The problem is developers are really bad at optimizing for these consoles because they are inexperienced with these consoles, relatively inexperienced because they haven't had that much time exclusively developing for these consoles. So, I'm not saying the developers are necessarily bad and they suck at optimizing, but there's a lot of potential with these two consoles that could be utilized and optimized, but we're just rushing things. So, you have a machine that's capable of running 120 frames. The human eye really can't tell a difference past 144 frames, in my opinion. I have a PC, I tested out. I don't personally notice any big differences past 144 frames. So if a new generation of console comes out, it's going to tag on 20 frames? I really do think in terms of graphical performance, that's where you cap out at as a console's 144. because anything past that is going to be really expensive. And for customers, they're just going to build a PC. Not to mention the fact, too, that if you want to chase those higher frame rates and actually get the fullest experience, you have to have additional peripherals that support that. For example, you need a visual display like a monitor or a TV that runs at 120 hertz if you want to experience 120 frames on these new gen consoles. And a lot of casual gamers don't even know that. So they, have these consoles and they're running it on a 30 hertz TV, or a 60 hertz TV, which isn't necessarily bad, but you have to understand that a lot of console gamers are living room gamers, and they're not really rocking with a 240 hertz TV because, one, that's really expensive, and two, they don't understand how that works. So now you're just throwing another wrench into things where you need to spend more money and upgrade your visual setups, which, people cannot afford right now. But anyways, let's say they do release a 4-figure console that runs at 200 frames per second. All right. What games am I going to get that is going to push that generation to the next level? And a lot of people are saying GTA 6 will be super beefy on next gen, all that stuff. I'm gonna have the hot take, and GTA 6 hasn't come out. We haven't seen gameplay. We have no clue how it's going to run on PS5, for example. But I do think if Rockstar dialed in, they could maximize this game to its fullest potential on the PS5 already. There's a lot of reports that are saying that GTA 6 is going to be at 30 frames, and I think that's flat out unacceptable because, for example, you can play a game like Cyberpunk 2077 at 120 FPS and it looks so good. And Cyberpunk 2077 is probably one of the best looking games I've ever played. It's got one of the craziest open worlds, one of the most dynamic open worlds. How is it to me that how does GTA 6 not run like that? I think it's going to be very comparable actually to Cyberpunk 2077's open world and their NPCs. Obviously gameplay is going to differ, but I think Rockstar could totally achieve 60 to even 120 frames with GTA 6 if they tried. I think they're going to wait and try to partner up with Sony to beef up GTA 6 and optimize it a bunch for a PS6 because they know that's what's going to sell the console. Maybe they finally release online mode with the next gen and this and that. But regardless, I'm getting off topic. This isn't a GTA video. My main point here is I think we're purposely getting developers that are nerfing the performance of their games or are going to start nerfing the performance of their games for PS5 and Xbox One Series X because Sony wants to get people to buy, higher level hardware. But I'm a true believer that the PS5, dude, you could do some crazy stuff with this. You could really optimize the crap out of this. People are talking about the PS5 like it's, not a great computing machine. It's pretty much a mini PC specs wise. You can run a ton of games that look incredible on this thing. So I just don't buy it that a new console generation is going to be this step up that you absolutely have to purchase. And even if it is crazy enough, a lot of people aren't even going to have the additional peripherals to support said technological advancements, like I talked about monitors and TVs. I also want to ask this question too. Are graphics even capable of getting substantially better? I'm at the opinion right now where I don't think so. And I know the classic pushback to that statement is, well, in the early 2000s, we didn't think it would get any better than this and yada yada. That's a completely different situation. Now we have games that literally can look like real life, like Red Dead Redemption 2, Cyberpunk 2077. We have some incredible looking games. And I'm at the point now where if I'm playing a super hyper realistic game, that's actually something that makes me uninterested. I want the gameplay to feel good. I want the art style to be good. I want the performance to not be 30 frames per second. I don't care about fidelity. I want the game to feel smooth. That's where I'm at. So if we're going to chase graphics in this next console generation, how much better is it going to be than the PS5? I've harped on this so much, but I don't think it's going to be substantial. I think that in terms of fidelity and ray tracing and all this stuff, we've maxed out the capabilities. Like, you really cannot improve much upon what we already have. So once again, if that's what they're shooting for with the new console generation, they're just gonna be shooting themselves in the foot, because in reality, nobody is going to purchase a new console that costs $1,000+ for a slight graphics upgrade. But yeah, a new console generation is not going to fix things. That is only going to add fuel to the fire for these gaming companies. Even though we are at the end of this current console generation, it's going to make things a lot worse, man. A lot worse for these companies. Obviously, if we ever get to that point where a new console generation comes out, that's $1,000+, man, I hope you guys just switch to PC, dude. A PC is going to last you much longer. You're going to have, better deals on games, yada, yada. Just go PC at that point. Please do not buy the new console. It's not going to be worth it. Now, there are some things that could make a new console generation good. For example, games, bro. Games. If we are going to have a new console generation, we need to have both of these consoles, Project Helix and PS6, they need to have bangers ready to go right on day one. The games at the end of the day is what sells the console, and that was the PS5 and the Series X's biggest problem, is they didn't really have any must-buy games that were exclusive to the platform. And who knows, maybe they are cooking something up, but they absolutely cannot afford to release new consoles and then release all the games 2 years later. That's not going to fly again. There needs to be things for people to play on your system if you're going to sell a video game console. So that's number one. Number two, I really do think something that could push the next console generation forward is handheld capabilities. And I know like the Nintendo Switch already exists, but I think Sony and Xbox could take a huge step forward if they also took a page out of Nintendo's book and did a, handheld slash, living room type console that ran at amazing performance and had amazing graphics. You could take it traveling with you and you could be playing like your game library. I'm not talking about like the PlayStation Portal. That's not what I mean here. I'm talking about an extension of your console that you can take with you on the go that runs at a very high performance. That would definitely set this generation apart. I mean, obviously the Switch did that, but the demand for handheld is there, and I could see that working as well. I'm not saying I necessarily want that, but I do think it would be a relatively good move as long as they can keep the quality of games up and all that stuff. But I don't even know how likely it is that we would see these companies pursue handheld, because I feel like in their eyes, they think that Nintendo dominates the market there and Steam dominates the market there, which they're not necessarily wrong. If you're going to come in, you better come in swinging hard. And also, Xbox, quote unquote, tried handheld already. They didn't really try handheld, in my opinion, but they had like the Rogue Ally Xbox sort of thing, which is pretty much like just a Steam Deck with the Xbox logo slapped on it. It's really no different. That's not, that doesn't count as an attempt, in my opinion. Who knows? We could see them actually go all in and try handheld. I think it'd be interesting. Who knows, though? We'll have to see. Like, I just think they have to shake things up a ton if they want to make this new console generation really work. Anyways, last but not least, we need to talk about the elephant in the room, if you will, and that's digital rights ownership. Yeah, this is getting under a lot of people's skin, and this is throwing more fuel onto the fire for everything we've talked about. Sony announced that January 2028 they will stop, producing physical media, which means that the PS6 is probably not going to support physical media either. And this is my take on it. I understand like digital purchasing of things is more convenient than like going to the store and buying a video game, and I wouldn't necessarily be against an all digital future if we had rights. If they couldn't just take the license from you whenever they wanted. I feel like that's a pretty standard take for a lot of people, completely valid. And it is really disappointing that they are getting rid of physical media and they aren't supporting discs anymore. I'm somebody who, I don't buy all my games physically, but I would say a good amount. Like whenever a new game releases, I go opt for the physical copy if there is one, because I like that experience more. I like actually getting like a case that I can collect and stuff and like have out on display. Like it's fun. It's also a lot more fun to get out and go and buy something. Maybe you meet other people who are excited for the game as well. It's just a social experience, and it's sad that Sony is against that. The whole gaming industry as a whole is against it, regardless of who pretends to be the good guys. That's a story for another video, but it is really disappointing, and a lot of people are rightfully upset, and that's only going to hurt a next generation console moving forward. It is not going to help at all if they stick with this policy, which it is looking like they are. And I think people would take it easier on them if there was more digital rights ownership for for people, customers, you and me. A lot of people wouldn't be as against it if we could actually keep the things we are purchasing and not just rent them for the same price as purchasing them physically. It makes no sense. But yeah, man, it really does seem that in the next few years, there's another storm that is going to be brewing in the gaming industry, and these companies are probably going to take more of a financial hit than they already have because they don't understand how to slow down and correct their general business. They don't, and they might actually run themselves into the ground. And I know that I say that a lot, and there's a lot of people that say that's a doomer take. But listen, guys, over the past 6 years, I would say even the past like decade, these companies, specifically Microsoft, or I guess like Xbox and PlayStation, they have slowly been driving themselves into the ground. This is a process that takes time, and we are really getting to a tipping point. We really are. They think they're invincible, but they're really not. Like the quality of their products has degraded over the last decade. Financially, they have been hurting over the last decade. They have been on a decline, man, especially these last few years. It has really compounded and gotten crazy these last 2 years for PlayStation and Xbox. You hear about layoffs all the time, studio closures, games failing financially, huge investments not panning out. It's happening. It is happening. And like, I know a lot of people who love this hobby don't like to hear that, but the reality of it is that's a good thing for us. That is a really good thing for consumers, because it'll force the hand of people in the space that give us these products to deliver and make something better. It just sucks that we have to sit here through this storm, and we can't afford new consoles. It just is not a good time. It really does suck, but things will inevitably get better. But if Sony and Xbox keep acting the way they are, things are bound to not get better anytime soon. So, they're just going to have to hurt financially before things turn around, because it's the only language they speak. So, anyways, with that being said, thank you for this watching this video if you watched it all the way through. And I'm very curious to hear your opinion on the next console generation and what you think is going to happen with it. Are you excited? Are you not excited? What do you think of digital rights ownership? All that stuff. Please drop a like and a comment if you really like this video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.